Rabbi Ari did a very good job of introducing himself, and he will again. I have to say, he is a dear, dear friend of Reverend Samantha, and so she was very torn for not being here today. Mm-hmm. She loves you very, very much.
I'll always hold it against her.
And you're welcome to come back, please, anytime. So I'm going to let him take it over. We've got a couple mics for questions. Seriously, folks, can't I beg you to come forward? I know, nobody likes to be in the front, but this is a conversation and it's a story, and let's give a warm welcome with our presence. All right.
So, good morning, everyone. I want to give a little bit more just basic background information for you all to share, for you to know a little bit more about who I am and why it is that I'm here right now. And then I'm actually going to start with what it is that I'm wearing as a way in to what hopefully will be much more of a conversation about ultimately why I left the conservative movement, the Rabbinical Assembly, in order to champion dual faith families, and also why it comes from a deep conservative Jewish place for me. So I mentioned that I'm a third-generation conservative rabbi. My grandfather, Rabbi Alexander M. Shapiro, Alav Shalom, he was actually very involved with the civil rights movement of the 1960s. He was also very involved in the Free Soviet Judaism Jewry movement in the 1970s and 1980s. I heard one story of his that in a shul, in a synagogue where he was a rabbi of in Philadelphia, where I am from, as you can see, go birds, go birds. That, I know, I'm in kind of enemy-ish territory, that's all right. Beautiful, there we go. Always good to see some familiar faces. And that he had come back from a trip down south in Alabama to learn more about the plight of African Americans in the 1960s. And one of the things he learned there was the prayer, the song of Go Down Moses, right? Go down Moses, down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go, which was a key rallying cry for the civil rights movement, because the civil rights movement in many ways was a religious movement. The idea of the beloved community that came from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was that it is through our religions, through our different backgrounds, and what we share that comes from our particularistic backgrounds that allows us to be able to build that beloved community together. So the story is that my grandfather came back, and like any young rabbi, he was told to work with the teens. Rabbis love working with teens. And he taught them the song of Go Down Moses. And a board member of his synagogue said, "Don't sing that song to our kids. That's not our song." In many ways, it was a political song, and it was also brought up within the context of an African American struggle that was not viewed in the same way as a Jewish struggle. And so one of the key messages and one of the key reasons why I am standing here today is because the legacy that I learned from my Saba, from my grandfather, is that religion is a way to unite us as opposed to dividing us. We don't look at a particular song and say it only belongs in one very specific way to this people, and if it's done in a different way, it belongs to another people, and neither the two shall meet. But rather that the prayers that, especially the ones that we share, but even the ones that are different from each other, can be centered in a way that brings us together. So that is one of the main reasons that I have always been thinking about, and part of my larger story, which I'm happy to share more, especially as we have as a discussion, that led me to realize just how important this moment is in the America that we live in today, which is that despite all of the challenges that we don't have to spell out because we all know what they are, this is still the country that for the longest period of time has the most number of people from the greatest diverse backgrounds, racial, ethnic, religious, cultural, even language, that have been able to live in relative peace and harmony in order for those of us, for all of us, to be able to find a way to say, can our diversity be a way to make us unified as a country? The American experiment is one that is very unique, and we should not take it for granted, especially because we really all owe it to one man, and he happens to be the founder of the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which is William Penn. William Penn, if you know anything about that period of history in the 17th century, he was a Quaker. His father was not a Quaker, was very upset with his son's religious background. But because of William Penn's Quaker identity, in which he knew that he was going to be persecuted no matter who was in charge, in power, in England at that time, that he wanted to find a place to build what he called a holy experiment. The holy experiment is that there should be a place in the world where all faith traditions can be able to live together. That's what freedom of religion means. Freedom of religion does not mean that we should take religion out of the world around us. It is that there should not be a state religion that determines this religion is good and this religion is bad. And so when he was able to build Pennsylvania, to form Pennsylvania, it was one of the very first places in the world where you could be invited to come to live, especially if your religion was targeted. That is why, by the way, that the Amish are very popular in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because the Amish were persecuted wherever they were in Europe, and they were invited to come in to say, we can make all religions work together. And if it wasn't for William Penn, we probably would not have freedom of religion in the Constitution as it is. And we here, not just in this space, but we in the American context, are trying to live out that dream of that holy experiment. But it's still an experiment, and it takes a lot of work to make it happen. So part of that work is to be able to say that we're not just going to use our religion as differences, but also that we're going to be able to raise up the particularities of our religions and not be scared of it. And that leads me to what I'm wearing here today. Is anybody curious about this? Feel free to raise your hands if you are curious about this. This is a talit, a prayer shawl. It's a different form of a prayer shawl because there are many different kinds of forms, but the main thing is the tzitzit. At each corner of the tzitzit, and you can see these around, are these little tassels, which, by the way, even in the New Testament, it is mentioned specifically about tassels that Jesus had worn. The tassels are there as a reminder of all of the mitzvot, all of the commandments in Torah. Now, you may be able to see it a little bit, but what's interesting about the tzitzit is that you have a number of windings as well as a number of knots. I'm not going to go through it with you, so you just have to trust me on this. But that the numbers of windings and knots use what's called gematria, or Jewish numerology, in which every number corresponds to a Hebrew letter, to spell out Adonai Echad, which means God is one. And so in one part of the prayer service, particularly in the Shema, so I'll put this back on for a moment. By the way, when I talk to kids about this, I often refer to it as the Jewish superhero cape, because here's what you can do with it, which I just find to be a lot of fun, is in order to be able to offer the blessing, you take it, wrap yourself around it, and you feel like a Jewish superhero. And you take it together, you take all the four corners of the talit, hold them together, and during one part of the Shema, which we prayed earlier, it wasn't one that we did earlier today, but there's a third paragraph in which the tzitzit are mentioned. You hold them together, place them around your forefinger, and then each time you mention the word tzitzit, you give them a kiss as a way to say, I see the commandments that are particular to the Jewish tradition, but by virtue of kissing the tzitzit, I am also recognizing that the commandments are there to help me come closer to God. The particularism leads to the universal idea. So that's the talit. And for right now, just because, as you can see, this is kind of it's a lot to deal with at times. I'm going to put it away for right now. I will fold it up if you're interested in how to fold it in a little more of a respectful manner. Happy to show that to you later. But I'm going to get to these guys over here. Is anybody curious about what I'm wearing over here? There we go. So I'm going to ask if somebody feels that they are knowledgeable enough to be able to share at least something about what it is that I am wearing. Please. Phylacteries. Do you have any idea what that means? Probably from the Greek. I've never understood what phylacteries means because I only know them as tefillin. Tefillin. Now, tefillin is really all about the Shema. Does anybody here have copies of what we shared earlier for the prayers? Okay. And your name is? Nathaniel. Could you please read the beginning of the Shema?
Shema Yisrael.
Pause for a second. I love when I say just to read the Shema, you start singing it. Because that's what we do. We sing the Shema. So please go for it.
Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Now, what's interesting, by the way, about that first section of the prayer, first I mentioned the Adonai Echad connected to the tzitzit of the talit, but it's also the most important element of what monotheism is trying to teach in its best way. Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, which by the way, if you read in the Hebrew, is not spelled as A-D-O-N-A-I, or whatever that may be in the Hebrew, but as Yud, He, Vav, He, which is also pronounced, if you just read it in those letters, as Yahweh. Yahweh. Which, by the way, if you ever listen to Bob Marley, and you ever hear him talk about Jah, that's actually the same name for God, because the J's and the Y's are actually the same letter in the ancient, especially in ancient Greek. And if you talk about a Jehovah's Witness, Jehovah, Yahweh are actually derived from the same exact word. So it's a particular name of God. And depending upon what your faith may be, you would say, Shema to all Muslims, Allah is our God. Shema to all Christians, Jesus is our God. Shema to any group, whoever it is that the God of your tribe, of your people, wherever you come from, that is our God. That is the particularism of all religions. But then the question becomes, well, what makes this so interesting that it becomes the core of Jewish faith? It's the last part where it says Adonai Echad. Literally, it means God is one, but Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel also translated it as God alone. That there is only one God who stands alone, and therefore what we're saying is our God is the one God. Our God is the one God. And that could be taken two different ways. One way it could be taken is that because our God is the one God, if you have a different God, you've got the wrong God. Or it could be taken as our God is the one God who is the God that all of us have been praying to always. The real question about religion and whether or not religion is for the betterment of society or for the worst of society is which direction do we take that in. And a lot of that we can see, by the way, in the land of Israel, in Palestine today, but there's also happened throughout ancient times. When the first Zionists came to the land of Israel, came to Israel at the turn of the 20th century, and then eventually led to the conflict with Palestinians, that in many ways the language used by many of the Palestinians against what Zionists were doing, they were not calling them Jews, they were not calling them Zionists, they were calling them crusaders. And that they were bringing up how Saladin from centuries before had freed the land from the conquering crusaders. And so the tension that exists within the land of Israel is often about, we believe that our God is the one God, and all you other people believe in the wrong one. And the world is only going to get better, until you believe in ours is the correct one. Interestingly, one of the texts that I use in offering a way to promote the Jewish value of intermarriage, or to put another way, that Judaism can permit intermarriage, particularly when both faith traditions are represented, both under the chuppah in a wedding ceremony, but also within the context of their lives, is if we see that outside of the land of Israel, we don't necessarily have those kinds of tensions that exist when you're in the land. Outside of the land, which is a very holy place, but tradition often teaches us that if you come to something that's so holy, it actually ends up doing the opposite of making you pure. It ends up tarnishing you because you try to be so deeply connected that you end up realizing that focusing too much on the particularity makes you forget that there are plenty of people around you who are different than you. And so it's outside that land that we can be able to see the universal context in which our religions are able to come together. That's all based within the context of the Shema. Can you keep going with the next piece?
Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
Beautiful. By the way, one quick thing on that. If you might notice, Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed is not supposed to necessarily be said out loud, but it's supposed to be said under our breath. The reason for it is because it is not actually written in Torah, that line. That verse was mentioned in context with our forefather Jacob, or also named Israel, that according to Jewish tradition, on his deathbed, when his sons were coming to offer their final thoughts before him, and they said, "Hear, O Israel," not Israel the people, Israel our father, because that was also his name. Don't worry, we're going to have faith in God. That it was his response to say, Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, which means to bless God. And it's a beautiful way in which thinking that the text that we have is not just what's written in the Torah, it's not just what's written in this ancient tradition, but that is also understood by the development of faith throughout time. And what we're reading is the conversation of different generations together. All right, keep going.
I don't have any more.
Oh, there's not any more now?
Oh.
You can just read it if you want.
Et Adonai Elodech.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. Keep going.
Oh. Bechol lafcha.
Uvechol nafshecha.
Uvechol meildecha.
Good. And what that means is that you shall love God with everything, with all that you have. By the way, from one of my teachers, I heard this idea that what does it mean for God to command you to love? Like, who can actually do that? No one can command you to love. His answer was, it's not that God's commanding you to love, it's how could you not love God? How could you not? It's almost like deep within us that there is this inkling of spirituality, this sense that we are part of something bigger, that's what's speaking of, and that we want to embrace that fully with everything that we have. And in many ways, in thinking about the context of this beautiful community that we have here together, that you're all a part here together, what you're saying is we want to embrace that sense of spirituality, that sense that we are part of something bigger, with all of ourselves, with our entire sets of traditions and our families of which we belong to. We're not just going to put one to the side because it's going to make life difficult, but in fact, we're going to embrace everything that we have, even the more challenging things. Keep going.
Vehayu hadvarim ha'ele asher antroi mitzi cha hayom.
Okay, Alavavecha, which this particular line is fascinating because I want to get to be very literal on this line, because that's going to get to what I'm having right now. These things shall be on your heart. All right? But not just these things. Hadivarim can also mean these words. The 10 Commandments are not actually 10 Commandments. In Hebrew, they're written as Aseret Hadibrot, which comes from the same root as Hadivarim, which means these words, these sayings. That if we're following the commandments, so to speak, it's not that we're trying to do something that we're told to do. It's that this idea is imprinted on us and imprinted within us. But the rabbis like to get very literal. Very, very literal. And that's where the next part comes in.
Vishin antam levenecha vidi bartabam vishicha bevitecha uvelacha vadarech.
Beautiful. And what this part is saying is that you should teach these words everywhere you go. One of the places it mentions is that you should teach it in your homes. And the rabbi said, let's make that very literal. And let's put the words of this prayer in a little box and put that little box on your doorpost, tilt it just a little bit inside, and here we have a mezuzah. The idea of putting a mezuzah is this idea of putting these words, these literal words of the Shema, inside this box that appears on your doorpost. By the way, the other part here, it also says that you should teach them to your children, which is where there is the teaching of passing along traditions to the next generation, but also that you should have them where you go. And I've actually seen a mezuzah that's supposed to be put in your car. It's pretty cool. It's a little one that you put, like when you open the door, you just have it right there. And the idea, by the way, is that this also comes from an ancient teaching around amulets. Amulets are supposed to offer protection, so that if you are in a space of this amulet, it is going to protect you from whatever calamity there is. And I have had members of my synagogues say, there's something bad in my life, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to check my mezuzahs. I'm going to check to make sure that there's nothing wrong there, that there's no smudge on the actual words inside, because if there's a smudge, it may mean that God's protection is not happening around my household. And so it's in a very literal sense, but it's also in the powerful sense of what this idea of putting these words in the spaces in which I am found can be able to protect us moving forward. Keep going. And by the way, you're doing a fabulous job reading, so beautifully done.
Uvkumecha ukshartam leot al iadecha vehayu lutotafat ben enecha.
Beautiful. All right, I'm going to pause you there. Uvshochbecha uvkumecha means when you lie down and when you go up, when you rise yourselves up, that you're supposed to say these words. And this is the teaching that at the first break of dawn, when you can just see that it is no longer dark. In fact, there's a specific color, the little bit of the blue of the sky that you can see, that is the earliest time of day that you're supposed to recite the Shema. You're supposed to recite these words. That's when you wake up. And then you're also supposed to recite the words when you lie down, which is the prayer you say before bed. So every night, my kids, who are now 9 and 11, they still want us to sing the Shema to them as they go to bed. And it is a very powerful thing. And the idea of offering a prayer when you go to sleep is something that's powerful that so many different traditions have. And I want to share one brief story on this. There was a couple from my previous synagogue on Long Island in which she grew up as a devout Catholic. He grew up without much Judaism in his life, but because he was from Russia, I think it was Russia or Ukraine, that he had a very strong sense of the importance of being Jewish, even though he did not have that much knowledge. But because of the ways in which intermarriage is viewed, especially within the Jewish community, from the perspective of loss, that if there is an intermarriage, we might lose the next generation to Judaism, that very often Jews who enter into intermarriage think that the most significant way that I can protect Judaism for the next generation in my intermarriage is to ensure that there is only one faith happening in the household, and that is the Jewish faith, even though the person who is often advocating for it may actually have much less knowledge than their spouse about what is in Judaism. And when I spoke with them, they were talking about how they wanted to make it work within the context of their household. And she was talking about, I want to offer a prayer to my child at night because that's what I grew up with. And I counseled both of them to say, it is unfair for the Jewish spouse to force his wife to offer a prayer that's not from her tradition when it's something that she wants to offer coming from hers. And so the idea that the Shema has to be the prayer that you recite at night is only if both members of the couple can feel like I can authentically sing it. Part of the question of what does it mean to be in an interfaith marriage or an interfaith family is whether or not both partners are able to be a part of the traditions that come uniquely from the particularistic backgrounds that they're a part of. I'm actually reminded of a story that Susan Katz-Miller once shared with me about Rabbi Harold Weiss when he was here, that I think it was a time that communion was happening, one of the first times that communion happened in the community, and many of the Jews in the community were not sure if they were allowed to go up and participate in it. And so as to exemplify that this particularistic tradition is one in which we want to be able to welcome everybody into this moment, he went up to do it himself, to show that it was possible, to show you are not abandoning your faith. In fact, you're holding your sense of connection to tradition, to what does it mean to be a Jew, by being able to exemplify that I am okay being in this space. And that was one of the messages I wanted to share with her and with him, that having her offer a prayer that is authentic to her is to be able to connect to that idea of Adonai Echad through the particular language that she comes from. The other two pieces of that section, so when you wake up and you lie down, then leads into what I'm wearing here today. The next line, and again, rabbis like to be very literal, is that you shall put these words on your arm and on your head. Literally, on your arm and on your head. What I am wearing here today is a fulfillment of that particular mitzvah that appears in the Shema. Tefillin inside this box, not necessarily the leather straps, but the boxes themselves contain the Shema along with 3 other prayers that include this particular commandment in order to be able to have the command of putting on your head and putting on your arm these particular commandments of teaching to your children that these are important for you to have with you always. Interestingly, the way in which they're written in this box is different than the way they're written on this box. And the way you can tell, I'm going to kind of show it to you if you're kind of in the middle over here, is that one of the boxes is completely smooth and one of them has 4 different lines to it. Because inside here, and I have a copy, but I don't have it with me, is that inside here are 4 compartments, and here there's just 1 compartment for the prayers. And there's even differences as to which order they should go into the compartments. If you have Rashi tefillin, it's one way. If you have Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, it's a different way. And when I went to get my tefillin one of the last times I was in Israel, they asked me, do you want Rashi or Rabbeinu Tam? I was like, dang it, I want Rashi. Because Rashi is my tradition, not Rabbeinu Tam. I don't agree with that guy. But here's the other thing that's interesting about tefillin, okay? If I walk around outside and I'm wearing this, I'm going to get a lot of different glances. People are going to look at me in weird sort of ways. And I'm not going to call anybody out now, but some of you may have seen me walk in with this or put this on and be like, what is that? What is that you're wearing? And in fact, it is the choice to wear something like this that I think really comes to the core of the message of why I'm here today and why I've devoted much of my rabbinate to the work of advocating on behalf of interfaith families or of dual faith families. But before I get there, I just want to show you one last thing when it comes to this feeling, to show you just how kind of very specific it is. First is this. When you put on tefillin and you put on a talit, that the first thing is that you're supposed to put on tefillin early in the morning. So you're supposed to wear it usually a part of services, but in fact, it's not just for services. I mentioned about if I went outside to wear it. In fact, the original tradition was that you were supposed to wear it for the duration of the day. It just happened that because the first thing you do in the morning is pray, it got associated with prayer. But I've actually been outside, been in the old city in Jerusalem, and I saw this guy with his cell phone on, smoking a cigarette with his tefillin on. And I was like, that's just a great scene. I had to take a picture of this. This is amazing. So, and it's designed in order to stay on you, and the way that happens is this. You put the box on. I'm going to be doing it by taking it off, but I'm just going to kind of show you in general. You put the box on. You make sure that it stays up on around your biceps because it has to be on your arm, and arms are supposed to be like where the strength is. So think about bicep. Like, by the way, there's a great picture of Yes, We Can Do It, of, I forget who it was. Yes, and there's a version of it for that women can put on tefillin because traditionally only men would put on tefillin, in which she was wearing this and going like this. It was great. And then what you do is you wrap it around, and then you wrap this 7 times on your arm, and you're not supposed to actually count the number 7. You're supposed to say a phrase in Hebrew, because it's not good to count Jews. It's not good to do a lot of counting, so you want to use a verse from text to do the counting. And the text here, because we're talking about putting on arm tefillin, is Poteach et yadecha umaspia lechol chai ratzon, that you shall open up your hand, and by opening up your hand, you shall sustain the living, which is one of the most popular verses in the prayer known as Ashrei, which is also one of the most popular prayers in a traditional liturgy. Then you do this. This is actually, you can almost kind of see it. This is the name of God that you wrap on your arm, wrap on your hand. It is the name of God known as Shaddai. Shaddai. If you ever heard of the term El Shaddai, and by the way, there's a lot of churches that are kind of named after El Shaddai. So this is Shin, an upside-down Daled, and a Yud. And the reason for it to be an upside-down Daled is because you're not allowed to write God's name. If you write God's name, you're not allowed to erase it. So I don't want to write God's name with my tefillin, so I just do an upside-down Daled, and then I'm fine. Right? Very particularistic. Very sort of unique ways of putting it on, and then also of taking it off. When I put on the head tefillin, there's a blessing, separate blessing for the arm tefillin as there is for the head tefillin. And then you also take it off in a unique way. You're not supposed to actually fully wrap it. You're supposed to unwind it. You take it out. You put it in whatever box you may have. These boxes, they're over there, I believe. Oh, no, they're right here. And by the way, these boxes are a little bit different. One box actually has a hole in it, and the reason for the hole in it is because when you take out your tefillin from the tefillin bag, you want to take it out in the right order. So in order to know which pair of tefillin you're taking out, I mean, seriously, guys. It's like there's like, how much time do you have on your hands? You're thinking about all this. But here's the reason why. I know, but here's the reason why. In all of these particularities, in all of these details, that's where you show the love. If we really want to be saying, how could you not feel that love of God for you in your life? You care about the details. You care about how things work. But the problem is, if you work them in certain ways, it may turn other people off. It may make other people feel, well, I don't do that. That's weird. Or, even more so, I don't think that you are a good person because who would put this thing on? You are obviously some weirdo. in the late 17th century and to the mid 18th century, Jews were emancipated from especially France and Germany. Because of that emancipation, Jews were allowed to become citizens of those nations. And the idea is that we are not just people coming from different backgrounds, but that we are universal human beings who have rights. However, whether it was Napoleon or whether it was the leader of Germany at that time, there was a concern as to whether or not Jews could actually be considered as full human beings compared to their particularly Christian neighbors. And so one response within the Jewish community is this: we believe in the same God as Christians do. We believe in the same moral principles, but to wear these unique particularistic items that make people feel weird, that make people feel uncomfortable, those things we're going to get rid of. And we're just going to make our religious services feel like you could walk into any religious service. I come from a tradition called conservative Judaism, which teaches that you can become a modern Jew and you could be a part of the world at large while conserving a maximum amount of tradition for the most number of modern Jews. And what I understand by that is that these traditions, like wearing tefillin and wearing a talit, are designed to be that secret, special sauce that makes Judaism so unique. And then to give that up just to be like everybody else misses the point of what makes religion so beautiful. The sights, the smells. I've heard, especially talking to Reverend Samantha, about how those sights and smells of the Christian tradition are things that people are yearning for and want to make sure that are present. But the problem is that whenever we come together in an interfaith space in general, we think that in order for us to focus on the Adonai Echad, that universalistic understanding of God, we have to move far away from the particularistic understanding of Adonai Eloheinu. That we can't get involved with too much of the religion. We can't look too different from our fellow because that would put ourselves in a different place. The reason why I left the conservative movement officially in order to continue to promote the value of dual faith unions. Yes, it's part of my philosophical understanding of the purpose of America. But it's also based on an idea that I believe to be at the heart of what IFFP is really all about, from my conversations with Reverend Samantha, with Rabbi Debbie, with Susan Katz-Miller, and with all of you through any opportunities that I've had to learn, as well as in my experience teaching in the interfaith community. Religion is so much better when it's not sequestered, but when it's shared. And that we are able to grow as individuals who are faithful to our traditions when we're willing to offer it, to share it with one another, and that we want the sights, the smells, the feels, all of those pieces of what makes religion unique. We don't want to shy away from it. We want to encounter it. We want to be curious about it. We want to engage in dialogue about it. I believe that one of the most important mitzvot that exists in our world today, one of the most important commandments that we have to engage in, is the mitzvah of interfaith, interracial, intercultural dialogue and cooperation. That means a number of different things, especially politically, but I believe that one of the key ways in which it's necessary is around the dinner table. For an interfaith family, interfaith dialogue is what dinner is all about. It's about every moment seeing how religion, seeing the tensions that exist by bringing in the particularities. Can they work? Am I okay with confusing Jesus for going up on Mount Sinai and for Moses being at the Sermon of the Mount? Right? Are we okay with that level of curiosity to be like, I want to know what these tefillin are? And not only just what they are, but I want to try them out. Has anybody here ever heard of Chabad? Okay, so Chabad is known for going out and reaching out to Jews around the world. And one of the things they love to do is they say, have you put on tefillin today? Because there's the mitzvah, there's a commandment of putting on tefillin every single day. And then you say, sure, I'm interested. You know, the first question, well, actually, the first thing is they say they will only ask that question to a man. They will not ask that question to a woman. By the way, I went to a Fish concert where there was Chabad there, and they were giving out candles for Friday night for if you want to light candles for Friday nights. And I went up to get them, and they said, oh, this is only for your wife. And I'm like, I light candles too. It's not just for one gender or the other. So that's the first thing. There's a gender piece to it. But then the second question is, they'll ask you, are you a Jew? And if your answer is yes, they're more than welcome. No matter what your background is, they're not going to investigate so much unless you offer it to them. But if you say, no, my husband's Jewish, my wife is Jewish, I'm curious about it, they'll say, sorry, it's not for you. What I want to offer, especially in a moment like this, is that putting on tefillin is a beautiful mitzvah. And especially in this moment, it is a chance for any of you to be able to try it on. And I'd be happy to show you how to do that if you so desire in a little bit of time that we may have at the end. But what's more is that it is okay for anyone to try it out. And you are not abandoning your faith or your tradition. You are positively influencing the other, and they are positively influencing you to be able to use that Adonai, Eloheinu, that sense of the particularism, in order to be able to connect to that universalism of Adonai Echad. Because at the core of the argument that I make and that I use as a foundation for why I believe that interfaith marriage is not only allowed, it is defensible from a Jewish legal argument perspective, which if you want to invite me back, I'm happy to share more of that at another point in time. It is because of this main point. If the experience of interfaith marriage is one in which you, the couple, can be a positive influence on one another from a faith-based perspective and an identity-based perspective, then interfaith marriage should be allowed, should be permitted. Interfaith marriage should not be allowed if one partner is going to be a negative influence on the other because of their fear of touching the Christmas tree, because of the fact that they still believe that unless you accept Jesus, that you're going to go to hell. Because those are views that are still existing within traditions and that people feel. But everyone, you are sitting here right now because you have made the choice to say, I believe in the positive influence of faith in my family and upon my spouse and upon my children, and I want to offer that with a full throat and with a fearlessness. And I think that fearlessness comes about when we're able to engage even more deeply in the rituals that make our religion so powerful, including putting on tefillin for anybody who wants. Thank you very much, everybody.
Do we have any questions? We got a couple of mics, and
Wait, by the way, I want to say thank you. And your name again is?
Nate.
Nathaniel. Give it up
Thanks,
for
Nate.
Nathaniel for his reading. That's amazing.
Oh, great. Introduce yourself, and then...
Hey, I'm Seth, and my wife, who had to leave to take our kid to drum practice, wanted to make sure that you're okay, that you left a community 6 months ago that was really important to you. So I wondered if you could talk about from
Sure.
Leaving as a rabbi from a community and how you found the interfaith community, because I think it's one thing I've thought about is wherever I go in the world, I can find Jews to do things with. Wherever I go in the world, I don't know how to access an interfaith community.
Yeah, so I want to make sure that there are a couple of things that, thank you for the point, is that while I have left conservative Judaism in only one particular way, which means that I am no longer affiliated with the Union of Conservative Rabbis, what's called the Rabbinical Assembly, I identify and am a part of the conservative Jewish community otherwise. So I belong to a conservative synagogue called Beth Zion, Beth Israel in Philadelphia. I am a rabbi at a conservative synagogue in Rhode Island that I go to about 18 times a year. I have a meeting coming up on Monday with rabbis from the conservative movement who have either are still too shy to go public, but also have left officially the Rabbinical Assembly because of their ways in which they're trying to be present for interfaith families. And when we had our first meeting and I said, no longer conservative rabbi, they all said, that's not true. You're still a conservative rabbi. You're just not a member of the Rabbinical Assembly, which means you can't get access to their website. I lost a member login, that kind of a thing. And interestingly enough, to the point that you raised, is a change in ways that this topic has been approached both within the conservative movement, but also within the Jewish world at large. So the synagogue that I am a part of, that I'm a rabbi of now in Rhode Island, it's a longer story, happy to share with you another time, but they knew when I came into the role, which was a couple years ago, that this was a possibility. And when I told them that this was probably going to happen, I said, you tell me how you want to go about it. And I was prepared, theoretically at least, to potentially leave my synagogue if they did not do so. But I had a good feeling that they were going to be supportive given the fact that I laid the groundwork for what was going to happen. Immediately, the religious committee met and unanimously supported my decision to leave the Rabbinical Assembly. Moreover, they went to the board and just said, let's make a statement of support from the Board of Trustees, and it was unanimous that they supported my decision to leave the Rabbinical Assembly in order to be able to do this work. There are a number of different things that allowed that to happen, including the fact that the conservative movement has shrunk, so there are fewer guardrails or fewer consequences of leaving the Rabbinical Assembly, particularly that many conservative congregations are looking for rabbis, and there aren't enough conservative rabbis to go around, so they're more than happy to find any rabbi who can fit the needs of that community. So when it comes to the practicalities of it, there aren't so many things that I have lost. In fact, I've gained so much because the reason why I'm here is because I was spending the weekend at a conservative synagogue in Baltimore at Hevrei Tzedek, which is a beautiful conservative egalitarian congregation, preaching this Torah of interfaith family inclusion. And I've been able to do that much more publicly, to make statements that go out to the press, like an op-ed I just published this past week, where I like the original title better than the way that they framed it, which was, the original title was Stop Hiding Behind Halakha. Halakha is the Jewish word for the Jewish legal argumentation, because conservative Judaism often says that there's no Jewish legal argument to permit intermarriage, and I say baloney to that. And I said that I think that it's possible, and I've been able to make that statement because I'm standing from the outside. So in fact, it's been a blessing for me to be able to share this Torah, to come and offer these teachings more broadly, more publicly now than I was able to before. And yet there is a feeling of loss, for sure. My grandfather I mentioned before, who I find a lot of inspiration from, he was the president of the Rabbinical Assembly back in the 1980s. He was instrumental in ensuring that women could be fully accepted as rabbis within the conservative movement, and spearheaded that work in the 1980s. At the same time, he would very much disagree with what I'm saying here today. What I wish is that he were still alive so I could have what's called a machloket l'shem shamayim, a disagreement for the purpose of heaven. That we have different opinions that are not about the fact that I want to prove that I am right and you're wrong, but that both these and those, elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim, both of these opinions are the words of the living God. Which, by the way, thinking about the way in which I make the argument, I still believe that the ban on intermarriage in Torah is still valid, but that it should be reinterpreted in the sense of referring to the negative influence that religion can play in a relationship. And I have seen couples, I have seen individuals who point to their spouse from a different faith tradition and say, see, I don't really care about my faith because guess who I married? There still are those cases, and the work of interfaith families and of the supporters and advocates for being both, for organizations like IFFP, or for what my podcast partner and I call interfaithing, which is the ways in which all families of interfaith backgrounds find their own unique concoction of how it works. Sometimes it's, we're going to raise our kids just in one religion, but we're going to go to our family to celebrate their other religions, and that any permutation is okay, but what you have to know is that we want to engage with both, and we're not afraid of it. Same, but different. So that is where it kind of all lies.
Thank you.
Two sort of quick questions, because I think you answered a lot of what I was going to ask. But
Sure.
What is the main rub, sort of when you were kind of told, thank you for your participation? Is it the actual, conducting a marriage ceremony with both, or are there other elements about how non-Jews are sort of participating and welcome in your congregation?
So I will fully admit that I come to this work not from a perspective of that I have a family member who is intermarried, and I knew that I had to figure out the way to make it work. I came at this, you could call it much more from a philosophical, from a theological point of view of what does it mean for me to be a rabbi here in America, and the mitzvah of interfaith dialogue, of working together, and that families are the best place for that to happen. And that Hashem, that God, Adonai, has put us into this opportunity to show that religions can make it work. And that is what brought me here. So the rub in my mind is that too many Jewish leaders are scared of intermarriage. Fear that what intermarriage is a sign of loss and not a sign of potential gain. And that even it exists, by the way, throughout the religious spectrum. Regardless of whether you are from Orthodox to Reform to any version of Judaism, there is a version of it where there is a fear of the influence of the other faith traditions on one another. And what I believed, especially from my conservative Jewish upbringing and the way in which I learned about how halakha, how Jewish legal argumentation is made, is to say there is actually a way forward here, but we should just be willing to learn it, to teach it. And the rub for me is that I grew up in a world in which we were encouraged to find those arguments, to think about reasoning in ways that fit within the context of tradition. And I said, here's one. And no one wanted to listen.
My second part, real quick. I don't know how to square. I have a freshman in college, and she goes to Chabad and brings non-Jewish friends, and they welcome that. They want non-Jews to come. They have free Shabbat dinners and as much wine as you want to drink, which is why I think a lot of them show up. But it actually seems...
You ply any college kid with wine, and they're happy to go.
So there's a line out the door, and it's a very popular thing for non-Jews to come.
Yeah.
So it seems like that runs counter to sort of the Chabad of like, we're not even going to expose you to it.
Here's the difference. Ask your friend to say, my friend would like to try out tefillin. Have them see what the rabbi says then, and then let's talk.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Leanta. So I feel like my question is too big for the last 14 seconds that we have. So anyway, I was just thinking about like the inherent kind of, I was so interested in your sort of like, hey, let's keep this very traditional garb, the tefillin, and at the same time, like, let's evolve our faith traditions to the new challenges, right? And I think that's inherent in a lot of the, as you were saying, why various religious leaders and religions, they don't want to truly recognize that people are trying to enjoy two religions or follow two traditions because they're afraid of it. But at the nugget of it is, what's the core that you have to keep and what can you change, right? Like, oh, the core is only men can be clergy. No, okay, we're willing to change that, which for many was like, that's pretty big, right? So it's like, okay, what can we change and what do we want to keep? And I think often, like I find in myself, the kind of some of the indicia from a more traditional garb or following, for me, it gets really bound up in this very old hidebound way. And so I'm reacting, and I grew up Catholic, right? So like got a lot of traditions that are, you know, I don't particularly enjoy or agree with anymore, but, and so it's very interesting to try to, I guess I'm curious of your thoughts about sort of balancing between like what really counts and what doesn't count, and, you know, kind of keeping an old tradition that might also be connected in our minds with, you know, only men can be clergy or some other belief that we don't share.
Thank you for that question. It's a great question, and I want to answer it maybe in a bit of a different way than perhaps what you're expecting. That if my guess, I'm just guessing here, that if you were to reach out to, let's say, 100 priests within the Catholic tradition, and you were to ask them, did Jews kill Jesus? You won't get a uniform answer to that. You'll get a variety of different answers to that. But the change happened on the highest level with Nostra Aetate, in which the official position of the Catholic Church is that Jews did not kill Jesus. That was the way in which this kind of interfaith gathering can even start from a Catholic Jewish angle, is that there is an acceptance of the validity of the other faith traditions as being valid, as not being totally forgotten about, as not totally being replaced. But the Nostra Aetate only came about, I should say only came about, but one of the reasons it came about was because of what the Catholic Church saw as their role, not in supporting, but in doing too little to stem the Holocaust. That it was Christian Catholic anti-Semitism that formed the foundation of what allowed Hitler to build his machine that killed 6 million Jews. And what they realized was that it needed to change. We are told to make religion work in this moment in time. There is a Jewish dictum called Dibru Torah Behoveh, Rabbanim Dibru Behoveh, that the Torah speaks in the present. That's why the Torah does not say anything about whether or not you're allowed to use iPhones on Shabbat, because it's dealing only with its particular context. That was the ancient Near East. Rabbis only deal with their particular scenarios that existed at that time. The way that tradition, at least in my mind, works is to look at how ideas have shifted over time based upon its historical context. It's what's known as back in the 1800s as a positivist historical understanding of faith. Positivist, that the decisions of previous generations are still accepted, are still valid, but that they are based in a historical context that allows us to see how they could be interpreted in our day. Sometimes you have to make a shift that is going to be extremely noteworthy, like with Nostra Aetate, but that has foundations within the history. The fact that Jews were not ultimately responsible for the death of Jesus, that it was the Romans, and that as a significant aspect to that debate between the two, whether it was the Romans or it was the Jews, was about Catholicism or early Christianity seeing itself as, is it either a certain denomination or sect of Judaism, or is it moving away from Judaism? And is it trying to separate itself out? And part of that move was actually to see that you could be a Catholic and not have to hate Jews in order to do that. And it's so those changes over the course of time that I think are so significant that allow us to be able to be where we are, and that we stand on their shoulders, the shoulders of those giants, and it's our job to make it work for this generation now.
On that note, exactly, which is fantastic. Big thanks.
Thank you.
Ari, that was amazing. We need to have you back.
Anybody who wants to try on fill-in, I'm here all day.
Yeah, and we have a few minutes for that personally. But thank you all for coming.
Eagles get rain.
No IFFP next week. See you on the 25th. And be well.